Mamdani is an assembly member from Queens and he's 33 years old and a self-described democratic socialist. So he's born to pretty well-known parents. His mum's a renowned filmmaker and his dad's an academic. And he was born in Uganda but came to the US when he was 7 and is now a naturalized citizen. And so even though New York is a pretty, considered like a progressive state, he was running on a platform that was considered really left wing and stuff that even, New York had never seen before in terms of policies, let alone the rest of the US. And it was he worked to kind of encapsulate using social media and really getting his message across in terms of having these viral moments. But pretty much everybody knew what his policies were going to be, even if they didn't like them. It was rent freeze, free childcare, free buses, and even opening grocery stores. And I think it was a clear economic agenda that he was really pushing, and it's clearly resonated with so many New Yorkers and so many people who have never really come out to vote before.
Actually, you talk about social media, and I think a lot of people would view him as the part of the generation clearly who, one might call social media natives, people for whom it's second nature almost to communicate effectively that way. What do you think was so notable about what he was doing on social media that allowed him cut through of this kind?
I mean, it's like a truism in politics that if you're internet savvy, then as a politician that you're going to do quite well. And Mamdani's age did come into it. He is a digital native, but I think also he was just really creative in terms of the way that he was going about getting his policies across. So for rent freeze, he would go running into freezing water. He would put out videos in different languages. So he has this video where he's speaking in Urdu and basically using mango lassis to show how the kind of primary election works and how the voting system works. And so a lot of it was entertaining, good picture, and it was always really fast. So there's one incident where he's kind of shouting at Tom Homan, talking about ICE raids in the city. Within an hour, his team had cut that up, put it online, and it just went viral. And, to some extent, he knew exactly who his audience was, and that's how he used social media. So he was going on podcasts like Subway Takes, which is basically where you give your best take and you just sit on the subway. Or he was on kind of other shows like Gaydar, and he also had Hot Girls for Mamdani with people like Emily Ratajkowski. I don't know if you've seen that one, but yeah, he just knew New York, he knew New Yorkers and really spoke to them on the platforms they were. And for me, I find that really interesting because it's not that dissimilar to Trump and what he did with, the manosphere. He was going on all of the kind of right podcasts like Busting with the Boys, Joe Rogan, Theo Von, and they kind of both have used social media to tap into these kind of spaces that already exist in the real world, but have put them virtually and got people who maybe otherwise wouldn't come out to vote for them to vote. And I think beyond talking about, social media as a tactic, that seems to be a very clear strategy that has worked for two really different candidates.
I just want to pick up on the policies, but before we do, maybe we can just have a little reminder of some of his clips so people get a flavor of it.
We have just begun our walk through the entirety of Manhattan. We're at Inwood Hill Park at the tip top. We're outside because New Yorkers deserve a mayor that they can see, they can hear, they can even yell at.
We are on the cusp of toppling a political dynasty and delivering a New York everyone can afford. This doesn't show that we will win. It shows that we can.
It is so exciting to be a part of that same mission to finally turn the page on the politics of the past.
Go, vote this guy, vote this guy.
Do you make $1 million or more a year?
100% disagree.
So then your taxes are not going up. The only taxes that we are proposing are on the 1% of New Yorkers who make $1 million or more a year.
What are you going to do about the price of matcha lattes?
100% not sure.
Look, actually, I guess the big question here is, I mean, we should make clear he's beaten Andrew Cuomo to the Democratic candidacy. Doesn't mean to say he's not the mayor of New York yet, and there'll be plenty of other independents he'll be up against, and there'll be a lot of rich people in New York who may prefer a more centrist candidate or be putting money behind other candidates. So this is far from over. But New York obviously has traditionally been a Democratic city, and he looks like he's got a decent shot at winning it at the very least. And the broader question I think everyone is wrestling with is to what extent this earthquake, if you can call it that, is a sort of blueprint for what might happen in Democratic politics more generally. Are we looking at a much more, Bernie Sanders AOC type candidate, even for the presidential election next time around, because this is where the public are or aren't? And I'm interested to know what you think about that and about his policies, because some of them are, by traditional capitalist standards, or at least centrist capitalist standards, quite radical. Rent freezes, wealth taxes. You've looked at all that, and other people have said, look, the reason people voted for Donald Trump was about the cost of living. It was about kitchen table issues. He spoke most clearly, most effectively about those. That's why he's won, and that's what you need to do to win any election in America at the moment. So I guess my question is, do you think it was just that he spoke most effectively about those kitchen table issues, or is it an indication that a potentially more radical agenda might serve Democratic politicians more broadly well?
You can't dismiss the fact that he ran on an economic agenda. He ran a campaign that transcended race and ethnicity, but so did Cuomo. He really focused on an economic agenda and, being disparaging to the Democratic Party. So you have both of them coming from that angle, but people look to Mamdani over Cuomo. And I think you can kind of take away from that is, people want to dismiss his policies and say, but he'll never get them through. But I think the question isn't really about whether he's going to get them through. It's the fact that he came with a lot of anger, a lot of irritation, a lot of frustration, and he presented these really big ideas that, whether they're radical in terms of the ideology, they're just creative and different. And I think that is something that really, really, really resonated with people, because especially in New York, rent for a 2-bedroom flat could be $5,500, and the vacancy rate is 1.4%. So it's an absolute minefield. And I was in New York, last week, and talking to different people, some of my friends, some people who also like taxi drivers, and everybody said they were voting for Mamdani, and they were like, I don't know if he's going to win, but I really like what he's doing and I want to support him. And it sounds like he really cares about us. And that currency is something that can maybe hold for other places. New York is different to the rest of America, but that's also what gives it this kind of special angle in terms of being a breeding ground, a place that likes an underdog, a place that's young. So, a lot of people really feel the effects of cost of living. It's not really so clear of whether it can be taken, policy-wise as an approach for the nation. But having somebody who cares, who is energized and is looking, to be creative and bold, I think that's something that the Democrats are really, really looking for right now.
Donald Trump's obviously been very critical and has threatened to withhold funds if Mamdani doesn't, in his words, behave. But do you think in reality Republicans more generally, and Donald Trump in particular, are a bit worried by Mamdani's rise? Or do they see it as, well, if that's the way the Democrats are going to go, that can only help us?
Seeing, the reaction in terms of the media, within the UK, within US, it's really clear that there is an issue in how Mamdani is received and how he is perceived. And Trump calling him a communist, people who are in the MAGA camp, just having this blatant Islamophobia towards him, calling for the next 9/11. There is a lot of vitriol that is going towards him. And you want to be able to say, okay, clearly that's because they actually do see him as a threat and they want to throw things at him. But whether that is going to mean that we're going to start to see some more insidious and racist comments coming out in the run up to November, probably.
One final question to you. I think I'm going to make a massive generalization now, which lots of people watching or listening to this might take great exception to and say it isn't true. But I would make an argument that for Britain and America, certainly, over the last 50 years, on balance, policy and public opinion has been moderately pro-Israeli. Not like necessarily in all cases, for sure, not, necessarily consistently, but if you took the last 50 years, for various reasons, I think you could probably say that is essentially true, and certainly of American public opinion and foreign policy for sure. And I guess it really interests me. There's been a lot of discussion and debate about Mamdani's, pro-Palestinian views, as people, his critics would see it. It strikes me that it is potentially problematic for Israel in that if you look at the next 50 years, that there could potentially be, because I sometimes look at it and think, I just wonder if this is happening, quite a big underlying shift in youthful opinion about the Israel-Palestine issue. Now, obviously, there's a lot of very loud people on both sides, and that makes it slightly confusing and quite difficult to sometimes understand where the middle is. But watching what's happened in New York, what's your assessment of that? Is there did that play any part in Mamdani's appeal? Is there a shift just analytically, or is that exaggerated?
Yeah, I mean, for Mamdani, he has kind of, been encapsulated in a lot of controversy in terms of his stance on Palestine. He declined to condemn the slogan "Globalize the Intifada." Even yesterday on Meet the Press, they were asking him, why he will not condemn this language. And he said, the language that I use and the language that I will continue to use to lead this city is that which speaks clearly to my intent, which is intent grounded in a belief in universal human rights. And it's interesting how deeply the media has latched onto his stance of Palestine. And also, there was this moment in the debates where they asked all of the mayor, like the nominees, where they would go as their first visit if they were to be mayor. And nearly everybody said, I would go to the state of Israel. And Mamdani was the only person who said, I would stay in New York. And so you then also had him going on shows like The Colbert Show, and they really started pressing him about his position on Palestine. And he was on with Brad Lander, who is Jewish, and kind of, they worked as kind of like a coalition together to keep Cuomo out. And he actually said, he came out on their show as well and was in defense of Mamdani and said, no mayor is going to be responsible for what happens in the Middle East. But there's something quite remarkable about a Jewish New Yorker and a Muslim New Yorker coming together to say, hey, here's how we protect all New Yorkers. And I mean, in terms of my kind of history of politics, I haven't really seen somewhere where that conversation about Palestine in the US has become such a big issue, where you have somebody who's kind of saying, no, I'm not going to take for this. This is what I said, and this is what I believe, very eloquently as well, and kind of uncompromisingly. So it is interesting to think, he's young, he has a stance on Palestine, and it resonated. So clearly it's not a hindrance. So it's curious whether you're right in terms of that's where people now believe, and that's kind of where the consensus is for young people, because, we have social media and you have all of these spaces where they're seeing things that they don't necessarily agree with their government's policy. And you have a candidate who kind of was an outlier in terms of the rest of them on Palestine. You could argue that, but I think it's difficult to take from his victory that therefore this is a clear change in terms of the opinion of Palestine, because he was also running on an economic agenda that resonated for a lot of people.